I don't think Dave hears you.
Okay, welcome back everyone. We'll have a second take at this and see if we can sort our issues out. But Dave, if you'd like to introduce our next clinic, that'd be great.
Well, good morning. Our next presenter is a retired engineer, management consultant, executive, and board member. We will now hear how, in just 18 months, he completed an HO scale 14 by 17 layout designed for operating sessions. We welcome Stephen Sprinkle.
Good morning, everyone. This is a photograph of my previous HO scale model layout, which was 12.5 by 14 feet in the basement of my home. Unfortunately, it had to go elsewhere because of a divorce. So I started over with a new space in the new home I bought. This is a bonus room over the garage. To make more room for our trains, I removed the cabinetry around the windows at one end. My model railroad was assemble it quickly, very reliable operations, to do things that were plausible rather than perfect or exactly accurate to the prototype. To use the transition period as my time frame so I could have multiple types of locomotives, both steam and diesel, and some short freight cars.
Stephen?
Yes.
If I may interrupt, your screen sharing.
Okay, so we can go back to that. Let's make that happen. Forgot. Okay, let's try this now. Okay, I just hit share on the Mac. We're going to allow, and now I'm going to make this full screen. Let's go to slide. Now it's thinking for some reason. Let me go backwards real quick. I apologize. Here's my original model railroad, which disappeared due to divorce. Here's the new space in my new home for the new model railroad. I removed the cabinets. Here were my objectives. I want to assemble it quickly. I want to have very reliable operations. I'd be satisfied with plausible rather than perfect scenery. I wanted the transition period to have both steam and diesel locomotives and short freight cars. I wanted simple operations and simple maintenance. I wanted to be able to run operating sessions anytime I wanted without setup. And I wanted it to be enjoyable for both children and adults. So I came up with an idea. I would have an around the walls design, even though I did have an aisle in front of one section. I wanted a dead level track with a crossover, no changes in height whatsoever. I was going to have manual turnouts that were all reachable. I used code 83 Pico, insel frogs, and flex track. I used N scale ballast rather than HO scale ballast, even though it's an HO layout, because I thought it looked better. I did provide an aisle at the front of 6 feet in depth so plenty of people could watch. I have lots of room inside the layout for operators. There's a 3-foot lift out section to get into it and a 40-inch tabletop height. Kids and adults can enjoy it, I think. Now, this is the room after I did painting, after I replaced the windows. I put lights in the ceiling. I actually put 2 kinds of lights in the ceiling. So one kind are these very pointable lights. There's 20 of those. And what you can't see is there's some in the ceiling dome lights. And I started this cabinetry with the help of a cabinet maker who's in my model railroad club. And he could do it much faster than I could. This is the layout in a sort of schematic diagram. I'll explain it very simply. Green is the main line, which basically is a double loop that crosses over itself. Blue are the passing sidings, of which there are 3. Purple is the yard, 6-track yard with an escape track for arrivals and departures. The pink here is the locomotive servicing facility with 2 tracks. And then everything brown is a spur to which we pick up or receive cars. And everything in green, green is the name of the towns, and this brownish color are the names of the different industries, of which we have quite a number. I think there's 18 industries on this. So 6-track yard, etc. There are 10 industry leads, each in a separate city. There are 18 industries. I do have 1 passenger station. I do have a power plant to coal mine recirculating track that runs under a mountain, so there's always new coal hoppers showing up with coal in them. The turnouts are number 6. There's a minimum radius of 25 inches on every curve, except for one, which for reasons I can't explain, I just goofed and let it get down to 20 inches. This is my heating and air conditioning. It's a heat pump from Mitsubishi. It's called a Split Mini. It's a weird device. It has some algorithms to save energy. So you set a temperature in it, and it may or may not come to the exact temperature you want based on atmospheric conditions and energy usage and other things. Here's progress on the layout. I'll point out a couple of things. One, this tabletop is actually cork. It's a cork inset that's 3/16 of an inch thick. And it comes in rolls that are 48 inches wide and as long as you want from Bangor cork. So my top surface was cork, which meant 2 things. One, if I want to have a road, I just expose the cork. Also, if I didn't want to bother with raised roadbed, because this is an industrial area, I could lay track right on the cork. Also, there are several rollout storage things on the layout. I have a continuous HEPA filter to get dust out of the air so it doesn't become a dusty layout. And I had builders that I brought over from my previous model railroad that I thought would work in the transition era. This is the flooring. By the way, my son works for the company that makes this flooring. It's called Shaw Industries. It's called luxury vinyl planking. It's artificial and it looks good and it's wonderful. You can clean up anything on it with alcohol. I also have a rollaway desk which rolls under the layout, so I've got plenty of places to work on stuff. And the desk has a cork top. Here's an example of one of the storage rollouts. You can see here my technological environment in terms of a Wi-Fi connection, a DCC master, and a power supply. These are those movable lights on tracks. I have 2 tracks. There's 10 lights on each track for a total of 20. There is no dark spot anywhere on the layout. Now, some buildings I purchased for speed. This one I got off eBay. It was a little beaten up, but I fixed it up and I made it work. Some I carried over from my last layout. This is from my previous layout that I had assembled. But then a bunch of friends helped me out. So this railroad station came from a friend, Robert Meyer, and it came to me fully assembled. And I actually had help. About 5 guys helped me assemble this railroad quickly, including things like laying ballast and things of that nature. Here's an example of a building that was given to me as a kit for Christmas, and then another friend assembled it for me. So Dave Kardesh gave me the kit, and Mike Tarrant assembled it. Did a great job. And this is part of the electric generation utility called Cobb Energy Management Corp. And this is the process of assembling the yard. This is the ladder track to which you can get to each one of the ladders. It's a single-ended yard. But this ladder track actually is 2-ended, so it attaches at the main line at 2 different places, which gives you flexibility. Another shot of the track being laid in the yard. And as you can see, I lay the track directly on cork. I use thin white glue to hold it down, and that way it doesn't raise up at all. There's no thickness of glue to worry about. This is the lift-out section where it is. So this is one end of the layout. The lift-out section goes right in here. And you can barely tell, but this is a very sophisticated piece of wood. It's cut at 2 different angles and it's dovetails. And what it does is as the pull-out section drops in, it pulls it into place and holds it tightly and aligns the track very well. So my cabinet maker designed that, great job. Here's the cutout sitting on its side of the drop-in section, and that matches that dovetail. Electrically, I have a 14-gauge bus. Actually, I have 3 of them. I have a DCC bus. I have a DC bus that's used for signal lights and certain accessories, and I have an AC bus for other accessories. I use 22-gauge feeder wires, which I soldered to the track. My DCC system is a DCS-240 command station with a PS-212 power supply. I have one UR92 duplex radio device with a local area network outlet. And then I have what's called a Digitrax LNWI, which allows up to 4 Wi-Fi throttles to be connected from mobile phones. So there are micro slide switches embedded in the layout on its surface, and that's what I control these signal lights with. So the dispatchers control the layouts by switching these signal lights to tell the crews what to do and throwing them turnouts by hand. So I didn't have to do a lot of putting in motors in the light. Here's an example of an accessory. My daughter, who lives in Denver, when I visited her before the COVID, took me to Caboose Hobbies. And this is a working water tower, and the spout comes down when it's time to fill and it makes noise. Oh boy. So I'm not sure what slide number I'm on. Let me try escaping for one moment, see if there's any setting that's causing this. Show media control. There's nothing here that's, yeah. Well, that's where I am now. Now, is it full screen on 27 or not? All right, let me go back to 27. Let's see if I can make this work. So there's a delay in transmitting where I'm at. That's a shame. Why don't you tell me when the screen changes? So I just click for a change. Tell me when it comes up. Okay, so this is my coal mine, and there is an opening through the mountain, and this is the recirculating track for the coal cars. I'm clicking again. Here is a sample of some of my rail cars. I was very lucky. An 83-year-old man going into an assisted living facility sold his collection of 485 freight cars he had made going back to the 1950s and beyond. They are made of brass, wood, and metal. They are beautiful cars, and they have brand names I've never heard of before, like Varney. So anyway, a dealer sold them for $10 a piece. I bought 50 of them. They needed work, coupler heights, weights, some needed new trucks or wheels. 10 of them were not salvageable, but I got 40 wonderful cars out of that collection. Okay, I just clicked, tell me when. Has it gone yet? Tell me when you see a flat car. All right, so here's an example of a flat car that was part of the collection with a wood deck. So it was a metal flat car with a wood deck. Beautiful piece of equipment. And now I just clicked, we're waiting for the slide to advance. It's going to be another flat car scene. Now let me try this. Escape. Yeah, I'll have to make it go back. We have some real software issues here. All right, here's an example of a flat car that I purchased and added a wooden deck to and weathered. Whoops. Okay, here's an example of one of the old cars that I picked up. Interestingly, they have sprung metal wheels, trucks and metal wheels. I purchased these loads, which turned out to be very nice and I thought were quite realistic. Here's an example of a purchased tank car. All I did was a little bit of weathering on it. And by the way, the track and the rail is inexpensive burnt orange paint from Home Depot. And this is the N-scale ballast that's underneath. Here's an example of one of the reefers that I got as part of the collection. Metal-sided, metal tops. Some of them are wood-sided, but again, a beautiful freight car. All right, I just clicked. We have to wait a minute for it to show up. I don't know why the delay. All right, here's an example of some cars I added to the collection. So this is an AccuRail model, which I weathered and added coal to the top of. And by the way, here, you can see what the cork looks like that's used for asphalt, basically. And here's examples of some of my transition area locomotives, a GP7 and an Alco RS3. And to make curves, I use these things, which are, they're called HO alignment gauges by Ribbon Rail. And they help you ensure you have nice, smooth curves. Here's an example. Well, give it a minute and it'll click forward. It's taking its time to advance. Now, let me see if I can force it. So here's an example of the lift out section in place. Here's its wire connector to provide power off to the edge there. Right here. Now, there's a problem with it, by the way. So this is meant to be a salt marsh at low tide. The problem with it is when I sent the CAD system notes over to my cabinet maker, I meant to specify that this would be 8 inches deep, so it would be narrow and lightweight. Unfortunately, I put an extra 1 in there. So it was constructed 18 inches deep, which gave me more landscape, but it's harder to take in or out. So if I had to do it over again, I'd make it only 8 inches deep. Okay, I just clicked. We have to wait a minute for it to show up on the screen. Now let's see if I can force it. Up there it goes. So here's an example of the fascia, a flat section. I've got holders for throttles. Whoops, there it goes. Let's try this again. So I've got holders for the throttles. Here's my radio for the wire, for the throttles, the connection for the LAN. You can see I have storage space underneath. I have a re-railer. These are the boxes for my car cart system, and I keep a skewer to do uncoupling on the edges of each one of these car cart boxes. I'll explain more about that. Okay, I just clicked. We'll wait a minute for it to advance. Here's an example of an industry that a friend assembled and painted for me. This was the kit from here to here. I added 2 big towers made out of PVC pipe. These happen to be tank cars purchased new, but I did weather them and make the running boards look like wood instead of metal. All right, I just advanced. Let's see if it gets going here. All right, here is the complex. So rather than every industry being one building, some of my industries are multiple buildings. So this is the Marietta Industrial Railroad. So there's a machine shop, there's a passenger station, there's a sand storage facility. There happens to be a diner at the railroad station. There's a sanding tower, there's a diesel fuel tower, there's a coaling tower, there's a water tower. Down below here is a gasoline dome. There's a conveyor bringing coal overhead to a coal pile for the coal tower. This is a warehouse, this is a machine shop, and there's another warehouse behind the crane, which is right here. I'll have to advance this manually again. So this is an example of the Harris Steel, the steel plant. And these are 2 buildings bought off eBay. I added a crane. Any place I have flat cars picking up or delivering, I provide a crane to do it with. And the crane is on rails that roll it this way and that way. I added smoke using cotton. I added some stuff, some structures behind the buildings. Here's an example of another crane. This is at the Marietta Industrial Railroad. And this one is actually an operating crane. It was in bad shape. It's a very old device from Germany somewhere that I got up off eBay. But I got it to work basically. And as you can see here, I added wood decks and weathered the wood to the flat cars. I just clicked. Oh, there we go. Here's a building section. So here's a machine shop for the Cobb electric generation utility. Here's the coal dump where the track is. Here's a conveyor to a coal dump. Here's a conveyor into the electric generation building. Here's a transformer farm. Here's high tension wires. Here's a warehouse for it. And then here's an administrative building for it. And then here's another crane to bring things off of flat cars. I tried to make things flexible so I could change my mind. So all my labels on the fascia are actually stuck in place using, I forgot what it's called, Velcro. So I can change names, and I have, and I've rearranged towns from time to time. Whoops, I'll get us back. Again, I'm having trouble moving forward. So this is an example of the turnouts I use. They're number 6 picos. The turnouts that have orange or on their those rails that stick out are the ones that are controlled by the dispatchers. Turnouts that do not have those colors are operated by the conductors for each train that goes by. Here's an example of how I blended using joint compound the rail crossovers at a grade crossing to the cork for the road, and did a little bit of painting some road stuff. Here's the recirculating track coming out from underneath the coal mine. And I made these pieces of rock here out of foam that I cut with a hot bladed knife. Here's an example of a piece of roadway that runs. So each industry, except for the coal mine, has access by road and has trucks and cars coming in and out of it, in addition to being serviced by trains. I went inexpensively and quickly. I bought all my trees. Admittedly, they're not the most realistic looking trees you've ever seen, but they do the job to get things up and going fast. I also made these background mountains out of foam that I cut with a flat-ended hot knife. And my signs are basically, I'll show you later, come off a label maker to get them done quickly. I did add an airplane flying overhead that's hung by fishing wire. Well, hopefully that photograph will come up in a moment. There we go. So there's the airplane. I had one locomotive that couldn't do the main long diamond crossing at the front because it had too short a wheelbase and the crossing had insulated frogs. So I turned it into a static display for a park. This shows you just an overhead again of the Marietta industrial area and the locomotive servicing track. So this goes off the layout, but it brings coal to a coal that's lifted up here, dropped into tenders on either track, diesel fuel, sanding tower, one of the water standout pipes, gasoline, used canisters, material being delivered to the railroad, etc. We also recently added some passenger service, very limited. So we have a single self-propelled Bud RDC2 car that we got from Rapido. Works very nicely. These are examples of the kind of loads that I purchased off eBay that we can put on flat cars. Here's another here's a gondola load. The only problem with this load is it's delicate. So in theory, I would deliver the load to the Harris Steel and take the load out and have empty gondolas go back, but it tends to fall apart when you do that. So I just leave it in all the time. Here's another example of the fascia. And in particular, you can see how I stacked a set of car card boxes. And basically, almost every industry has 2 boxes. There's a box that's labeled, like this is for American Hardware. Without an arrow means it's a car that has to stay in place because it's not ready to leave yet. If you put a car card in a box with an arrow, it means it's ready to be picked up. And because this arrow goes to the right, it means this is to be picked up by trains moving to the right. Here's an example of the car card. Basically, the card represents a car, and there are 4 possible destinations. As you move the freight car through the layout, you advance this from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and it tells you where to go next. Also, the color tells you that destination, for example, for Leah Superior Flower Company, it is to go with trains that move to the right. So orange means to the right, and yellow means to the left. Here's an example of the cards in their boxes. And again, Marietta Industrial Railroad is a destination. The box saying leave the cars put is empty. The box saying pick up all the cars with an arrow to the right is pretty full. Here's an example of another flat car from the gentleman's collection. This one is metal. It was beautiful. The only thing I did to it was add some things to hold the loads in and give it a little bit of rust weathering. This is the label maker I use to put labels on things quickly. If I get unlazy, maybe someday I'll put on other kinds of labels that look more realistic for the time period, but this works for the moment. This shows the car card boxes with a skewer at the end to uncouple cars. I find the skewers work much better if you flatten 2 sides of that point rather than just having it circular to a point. Whoops, let's get this back. For my 2 locomotive servicing facility tracks, I have separate power that I can turn off just in case I get tired of hearing the idling sounds of the locomotives. Here's a view leading into that lift out section. And basically what you see is there are 1, 2, 3, 4 tracks coming in from this side controlled by 4 signals. There are 4 tracks back the opposite direction coming in. This happens to be an isolated programming track, which basically says the mainline dispatcher has to pay great attention to this. The possibility is you could have as many as 8 trains coming in. Now, we only run about 4 at a time, but you could have 4 trains headed the same direction here. So you got to watch what you're doing. This kind of shows you how things look at a distance. So, you have things for your throttles, you plug into the LAN, you got supplies and equipment underneath, you have a rerailer, you have your car card boxes, you got an uncoupling thing, you have label that tells you what city you're in, you have labels on the boxes to tell you what your destinations are. This button makes the automated water tower work, and I put cotton on the chimneys, and there we go. And this shows us the passenger station with my self-propelled car. Now this is the youngest operator on my layout. It happens to be the 4-year-old grandson of my girlfriend, and he seems to enjoy it. This is the oldest operator on my layout. My father is 95 years old, and he still does this. And he grew up in Bluefield, West Virginia. His father, my grandfather, was the foreman at the Roundhouse in Bluefield, West Virginia, where they basically serviced both the giant coal hauling steam locomotives and the fast 484 passenger locomotives. And by the way, my cabinet maker is so nice. He also gave me curtains to cover corners where there were no cabinetry underneath. And this is an operating session. Now, I haven't had any recently due to COVID, but hopefully we will reassemble at some point. And so that's the story for today. So if anybody has questions, I guess I can answer them. I forgot the name of it. It comes as a static grass in a flat section. I don't know, maybe it's 8 inches high and 6 inches wide or something about that dimension, maybe even a little bit wider. But anyway, you can look it up on eBay, and there's lots of vendors of pre-made flat static grass that you just glue down. So you cut the edges to whatever shape you want and glue it down. So it's easier than using a static applicator and all that other stuff that you sometimes see.
Okay. Dave, did you catch any questions out there? You're on mute, Dave.
Took me a second. I kept hitting the button and it wasn't unmuting. No finger today. Haven't seen any yet. This thing. Oh, here we go. How long has it taken? That was the
18
one.
months with the help of 5 friends. And by the way, I have one addition that may be made. A friend of mine keeps bugging me. He says, you need to put a subway system underneath because he and I both grew up in New York City. And I've decided I'm going to try to squeeze in somewhere elevated train track and put a few sort of subway cars on top of an elevated train track somewhere as a static display of one section of the layout.
We have another one. Can you tell folks how you make the smoke in the smokestacks?
Oh, I take a piece of brass wire, brass wire that's a little bit flexible but mostly stiff. I glue it into the chimney. Then I spread super glue on that piece of brass wire. And then I take puffs of like cotton balls and I just pull them apart a bit to make them a bit stretchier and longer and glue them all around it. Then I kind of stretch them a little bit more so you don't see the seams of the individual puffs. And it looks like white smoke.
Yeah, okay. I'd noticed in your slides you had some what looked like to be wire mesh rolls on a load there. How did you make those?
I did, and I purchased them. I'm trying to remember the name of the vendor on eBay. It's a senior gentleman who makes them. He does a good job. I think it was something like JWD Enterprises or JWR or JRD. I think it was JWD, but I'm not sure.
JWD. I know your loads.
Yeah, I love the loads that he creates. He creates loads of rebar that look perfect for flat cars.
Okay. Can you just touch on your electrical side of the thing with the layout? So your DCC system or whatnot?
All right, so it's a DCC system using Digitrax components with Digitrax DT402 wireless throttles. I have 4 of those. But I also have a device from Digitrax which provides the ability for up to 4 mobile phone throttles to hook in. The buses are 14 gauge and I run 3 buses, one for DCC, one for DC, and one for AC accessories. I use 22 gauge feeder wires that I solder to the track from underneath. I don't have any, what do you call them? I don't have any motors that do the turnouts. The turnouts are all manual. And the signal lights came, I bought them off eBay. I got them dirt cheap. I forgot what the price was. It was like 4 of them were $12 or something. And I just bought a package of tiny micro slide switches. Again, very inexpensively, a big package of switches. So the slide switch moves it. Luckily, there's enough room inside the layout that the dispatcher and the tower operator can get to anything pretty easily to make it work. And just to give you an idea how it operates, you can have up to 4 trains, each of which has a locomotive engineer and a conductor. You have a yard master, you have a mainline dispatcher, you have 1 tower operator at the place where the lift out section is and all those tracks come together. And then you have 1 freight manager. His job is to advance the car carts and the waybills in the car carts from box to box so all the loads keep circulating. He also recirculates the load. So if a load gets to its end destination, he picks it up from that industry and brings it back to its beginning location to be recirculated. So it can keep like 13 people busy for quite a while.
Yeah, okay.
That's a
There's
lot of
sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, that's a lot of folks in a room as big as you have.
Well, remember, there's nothing in the inside of the layout. It's an around the walls layout except for an aisle. So the opening in the middle is pretty big. You can fit people easily.
Well, we did have a comment that says the layout looks really great. So people are interested in what you shared.
Whoop, my picture just disappeared. I don't know why. Did you guys go away?
No, we've still got you. I've got you. Every audio's good still.
Oh, okay. Let's
Okay.
clear
Oh,
that.
I do have a question. Is what's the height of your layout?
So it's 40 inches to the cork flat surface, which was a compromise. It's high enough to keep adults interested, but it's low enough that children old enough to understand can probably still see it.
Okay. What about the track work? What brand of track
It's
and
all
code?
Pico.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all Pico, Code 83, and Pico Insulfrog, turnouts number 6, and a crossover, and that's about it.
Okay. Turnout control. What are you using for your turnout control?
I don't. It's all manual. You're flipping with your fingers.
Okay. That makes it easy, doesn't it?
That's how you get it going fast. If I had to put the motors under the layout for each turnout, I'd be building it for a few more years.
Okay. Um, lighting for your layout. What do you have set up there for the lighting?
So there's I think there's 6 or 8 dome lights that are LED in the center of the ceiling. You have to realize the ceiling's, it's flat at the top, but it's kind of angled at the side with the roof line. And then there's 2 long tracks. Probably each track is, I'll guess, 18 or 19 feet long. There's 10 pointable LED lights on each track so that I can light up very specific parts of the layout. And so basically on the layout, there's no shadow and everything is lit.
Yeah, okay. I see there's another quick question that's come in on YouTube is, I saw a connector joining the layout underneath. What are the connectors?
Oh, I got those at Home Depot. They are low voltage connectors that are used for low voltage outside applications, like maybe low voltage lighting outside. Um, and so and these come in a package of 4, I think. And you just stick the wire into them. It doesn't require even stripping well, I'm trying to remember. I think you may have to strip the wire, then you stick it in and it just holds it.
Okay. Dave, is that all the questions that you can see there?
That's all the ones I can see. I have one question for you though. Um, it's said that the layout is never done. What's one thing you still want to do on this layout besides
Well,
that?
bugged by my friend, I'm going to find somewhere to squeeze in a little bit of an overhead railroad that will have subway cars on it. Now, I haven't figured out if I'm going to put it over a roadway or over a piece of existing track or have an angle over a corner. And I'm not sure it's completely feasible, but I'm going to give it a try. So we'll see.
And there was one last question. It says it looks modular. Is it, and how do they go together?
Did come in sections, but it's not a modular standard. So the cabinet maker basically made each corner as a segment. And then between each set of corners, there are 2 linear segments. So basically, and then there's 1 lift out section at the front. And that's how we could get it up the staircase, because it's one of those staircases that has a half a flight of stairs, turns to the right, goes another half flight. And in theory, we could separate it again. Now, I did not put connectors at each sector boundary for the buses underneath. So if I ever moved the layout, I'd have to cut all the buses and put in connectors. Interestingly, I did that with my previous model railroad when I just knew I was getting divorced, and actually sold it to a friend of mine who did disassemble it, put it up in his space. And the only thing he changed in a major way was he put bigger legs so it would be higher up. I think his is 50 inches higher rather than mine. He was very lucky. He had the exact size spaceport in his basement. So the old one isn't operating. It's got a different theme now than I had, but it is an operating layout somewhere else. So it was pretty sturdy that you could take it apart and move it even after it was assembled.
Okay, I think that's about all the questions that I can see there. Thanks again for putting up with us through the few little difficulties we got at the start of the stream. But it looks like we've got all that tested and going now, so we're going to cut to a few ads, and we'll be back shortly with the next clinic.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Well, welcome back. Our next clinician is from the Piedmont Division from Atlanta, Georgia. What can I say about Perry Lamb? I've known him for about 20 some years, working with him on the National Train Show, seeing his layout, and strangely enough, even a convention roommate from time to time. Perry today is going to share his clinic on military flat car loads. He's a lifelong model railroader and military modeler and will show us the ways to model those loads. In the daytime, he is a technical support engineer in the healthcare field and a former paramedic. Let's welcome Perry Lamb.
Thanks, Dave, and it's good to see you, and I can't wait to see you again in person whenever that is. It'll happen one day when we get over all of this, and I will get started with this. I will share, and off we will go. And we will turn this into a slideshow. Okay. As Dave pointed out, this clinic is modeling 89-foot flat car military loads for your model railroad. And if you've seen any of my previous NMRA-X stuff, you'll see that I am not completely and entirely without humor. I put in entertaining slides and things like that. And we'll get started. First, we'll do a little bit of background. This slide is from the slide presentation on my model railroad, the Utah, Colorado, and Western. I model today. I model the Western United States. It's a freelance Class 1 model railroad, but it has a history that goes back into the 1800s in Colorado and Utah and Wyoming, and it just grew from there. We at some point purchased Norfolk Southern, paid cash for them, so we're a true transcontinental railroad. And one of the things that I find of great interest, having been a military modeler for so many years, is that my railroad needs to transport military equipment. That's the sub hobby within the hobby of the world's greatest hobby. We transport a lot of it. We have pickup points in all the major installations. We deliver coast to coast. And if Spring Mills Depot will ever actually get its 6-wheel truck, 72-foot long, heavy duty DODX flat cars out, transporting M1A2s will actually happen on my model railroad. As it stands right now, they're running around the railroad on 60-foot, 100-ton cars, which works, and we'll see some of that in this clinic. But I had a great interest in transporting military equipment. Knew that a large percentage of it did transport on 89-foot flat cars, wheeled vehicles, much lighter armored vehicles like engineer vehicles and ammunition transporters, because they don't go loaded. Construction equipment, all that kind of stuff goes on 89-foot flat cars. So I knew that for my railroad, I would need a stock of them. And I was trying to think of ways to model them and thought, well, one good way would be if I ever find any on sale or at an auction or something someplace, I could purchase open auto racks. So we'll take a look at some of that. Yes, modeling military on my railroad is important. When I went back to working on scenery on my railroad after I completed my scenery certificate and then took a hiatus from model railroading because that was an entertaining task, I worked in this area of my railroad first and started in on the construction in the back corner of a POL facility, petroleum, lubricants, and oil facility. Built all of that, built ready racks for equipment to carry or transport fuel out into the field where units were being trained. This is at the George Smith Patton Armor Training Center on my railroad. We'll look a little bit more at it. This will be the area where the cars that we'll look at in this clinic will be transported to, along with flat cars, smaller flat cars loaded with heavier armor. But this is where all of this will end up going. And this is this corner of the railroad where the actual unloading will go. You will find, and you'll see in this clinic, that when military equipment is transported, while the cars themselves may not be the most clean things on the planet, they may not get scrubbed and washed down regularly. Military equipment before it is transported is. So everything that you see on a train, whether it's new or not, will be clean. There may be a little bit of grime on it. There may be some oil stains or fuel stains, but for the most part, military equipment before it is loaded at whatever installation is washed and serviced. When it arrives at its destination, it is serviced to make sure that nothing went wrong before it goes out into the field for whatever exercise. When it is done at that exercise, it is inspected, serviced, and washed again, put back on a rail car or even on a semi-tractor or trailer, and transported to wherever it goes. So in this area on my model railroad, I will have wash facilities, and this building may not be the one that stays here, but there'll be a building for performing ready repairs on equipment that before it goes into or out of the field. Then I'll have the loading ramps up here, not this because it's not heavy enough, and off we'll go. And this is just a closer up view of this facility. The signs that you saw on the first one and the ones down here, I actually pulled off the internet off of a full color Department of Defense specifications on signs for buildings, so they're in the appropriate color. I just dumped them into PowerPoint, edited and used my own text, and this is the sign here and the one at the entrance are all appropriate to this type of facility and this type of entrance, because this is not the main entrance to this facility. This is a back gate. So we'll take a look at some of the prototype information first, because we want to make sure, of course, that we model, as close as we can get to prototype what we're working on. And there are a couple of different 89-foot flat car types that are out on the railroad now. These ITTX cars and the TTDX cars, very similar. They use or can use different chain tie down methods, but they've got tracks down the centers and rub rails down the sides. We'll see a little bit more of that in a moment. Standard 60-foot cars are used for a wide variety of equipment. You can load a single M1 Abrams on a 60-foot standard flat car. The DODX cars are actually have three axle trucks. I think they're 72 feet long, and each one of those will transport 2 M1s or 2 Paladins or something along those lines. The 89-foot flat cars will hold wheeled vehicles, like I said, light armor vehicles, construction equipment, that kind of stuff. Okay, and we'll continue. These two kinds of cars are the major forms of transportation for military moves. 89-foot cars provide the bulk of that kind of transportation. The 60-foot cars transport somewhat less of it and more of other sorts of things, but 89-foot flat cars are used to a great degree by DoD for transporting its equipment. So as you can see, we need, if we're going to do this kind of modeling, we need a large number of 89-foot chain flats, because that's what our equipment will be transported on. And these presentations I found on the internet when I went out browsing in the construction of this clinic. I went looking for pictures of military vehicles and 89-foot flat cars and found them. It's interesting that in these presentations that I kidnapped from the internet, to put it politely, the spelling in some of these things is odd. Maybe it's to prevent people like me from stealing them and using them, but anyway. So the ITTX cars we've looked at, on this particular ITTX car, we see an M113, and 3 M577 armored command vehicles. Kind of interesting to look at, interesting to model. They're kind of, it's still based on M113 chassis, which are really old, even though they've been upgraded and dieselized and all that stuff. And then this ITT-DX, it's got an armored Hummer on it, and it looks like a good size Oshkosh at the front end of it. Not sure what what the vehicle is in the middle. It may be a PLS. It almost looks like it's a PLS, a trailer for hauling heavy equipment. And then this actually may be one of the PLS palletized loading system tractors. And then there is a third version, these TPDX cars that are coming out. And we'll look at that in a moment, because that's important to kind of the basis behind my clinic. These new cars, 286,000 pound gross capacity, they are built with pop-up container pedestals, because the U.S. military has its own container specifications. In addition to general 20-foot containers, they also have much shorter containers that can get pinned together to form something that's the equivalent of a 20-foot container, but they're each unique and each independent. 10-foot ones can get paired together. 5-foot ones get paired together or grouped together as well, and those ones form the equivalent of a 20-foot container. They have plates that will bridge between them. They're compatible with XDTX fleets. And all of these cars, all of these 89-foot, whatever variety they are, all of these 89-foot flat cars, when they're out and about, have the chain tie-down assemblies. They're not mated permanently to the car, but the chains stay with the car wherever they go. So an 89-foot flat car shows up at your facility. The chains for fastening down, securing whatever that load is going to be, are there with the car, and they stay with the car. So you drive your equipment on, whether it's a combine or John Deere tractors up from Dave's area of the planet, or military equipment from wherever it is it's going in Texas or Colorado or whatever, to wherever else it's going. The chains are already there with it, and those permanently stay with the car. The bridge plates do not, but the chain assemblies do. And a good portion of the reason for my clinic is because of what's in this slide. When I sat down to model 89-foot cars, I had no idea that this actually existed. This shortage actually existed. DODX has planned for a minimum fleet size of 1,500 cars. It's been trending well below that for a number of years. That run of 850 cars that we just looked at pushes that threshold back up above the minimum fleet size here in 2018. But then as other cars are retired and pulled out of service or put into other types of service, by 2021, by mid-2021, we go back to the minimum fleet size, and then it drops from there. So my thought was, okay, I need to have a way to put these cars into service. My original plan was to, when I like I said earlier, my original plan was to take some form or another of an auto rack, or whatever it is I could find in the way of on sale, reasonably good looking 89-foot flat cars and load them with military equipment. When I pulled this slide, when I found this slide on the internet, I thought, oh, this will be a good justification for the program that I have for my model railroad. So this is the aim of this clinic, is to model cars to reverse this trend, and keep a good stock of cars up, so we're up to or above this minimum fleet size of 1,500 cars. So how do we resolve this issue? Well, we start with a kit, and I found, and I'm not sure exactly where I found them. It might have been at one of our Piedmont Division auctions, but I found a whole collection of these AccuRail 89-foot open auto racks, which is very nice because the open racks mean that the floor of the car, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail, has reasonably okay detail for a modeling project. It's not just a blank sheet of styrene plastic that somebody snaps a closed shell on top of for an enclosed auto rack. This one actually has some detail on the deck of the flat car itself. And then, of course, it's got its second floor, which we will eventually discard. But my idea was to then take these cars, build the racks, and the vertical posts for the racks are these here. The back side of each of these vertical racks has a gusset plate on it. And then so you mount this vertical piece in the holes along here on the side of the car. And then you take the front gussets and attach them to the front of it. There's bracing for lateral stability for the rack itself. There are plates to go at the ends of the cars. There's other details. There's the ladders, all that other nifty stuff. Great, off we go. So what I will do is build these cars and then cut the racks off. And it's interesting because at the last SER convention in Cartersville in 2007 or whatever it was, one of the tours was to Trinity Rail, and Trinity Rail actually had one or two of these 89-foot auto racks in on their shop floor, and they were cutting off the racks to refurbish the cars and I assume drop new auto racks onto them. I thought, well, that'll be cool. That's exactly what I will do. I will cut the racks off, build the racks, cut the racks off, put these cars, make any repairs or anything that needs to be done to tune up the flat cars themselves, put them back in service on my railroad, and off they'll go. So that's what I did. Oh, and we'll look at the flat car deck in a little bit of detail. Okay, this is I mean, obviously there aren't rub rails here, but we can live without that. But there is a reasonable simulation of the tie down areas down here in the center of the car where we can attach chains. It's a steel deck, so that's fine, because the varieties of these cars either have wood or steel decks, and this one's got a steel deck, so I'm happy with that. So based on the concept that we do kind of have to compromise, and I really can't afford to buy 10 or 15 Athearn Genesis 89-foot flat cars, I will live with this. So sat down and built the car. Here are the vertical racks attached to it. I haven't put on the front gusset plates yet, but they go on there. In order to keep them up and vertical, I use the upper floor in here to just hold everything in place temporarily. Got the racks built. It looks good so far, and we continue. And we cut the racks off. Well, wonderful news to see. The pins on these, and here's where the back gusset plate is. That's actually part of the vertical frame. Here's the vertical frame itself, and then there's that front gusset plate. But these vertical posts don't actually completely fill the holes in here. So even when you cut these off and then trim them down even closer, you still have holes in the deck of the flat car. Yep, that's not good. So, but we, we got this part down. We filed it down. We've gotten out a sanding stick from Sally's Beauty Supply, and we've kind of trimmed it up a little bit. We've gone off to the other side, and we've now trimmed the rest of that down. We've used Squadron White. I used Squadron White putty to finish filling in the little bits of divots that were left from those posts that didn't actually fill their holes like they were supposed to. So I decided that for future events, for future versions of this car, that mistake number one was actually building the racks. Not going to do that again. I am simply just going to fill in the holes with the Squadron putty, let it dry, get out a sanding stick, sand it down so it looks like it's been cut off and cut off with a cutting torch, ground down with a grinder, and left the way it is, because it's much too much work to build the racks, cut them off, and have to refill everything and treat the deck anyway. Just not worth it. Okay. Next part of this process is these AccuRail kits have pin-mounted couplers. Pin-mounted couplers are no way to mount trucks on a car, especially in HO scale. We got this nifty little boss in here. It's got a nice big hole in it. We have these plastic pins that come as part of the car kit. You put on the bolsters. You put in the parts that for the draft gear here and here, and then you pin the trucks in place. Nope, not going to happen. So we take a piece of sprue left over from the rest of the construction process. Here's this Squadron putty that I mentioned earlier. We sand down the piece of sprue so that it fits the inside of the hole where the pins would go. We glue it in place with liquid styrene cement. I use Tamiya's cement. I really like it. We let that dry. We file it down nice and neat. And then we drill and tap this for a 256 screw. So off we go, so we can mount the trucks with screws, much nicer. We then mount the rest of the draft gear, and we have this nice area now to drill in and mount the trucks, and we'll look at that in a minute. We glue the frame in place. Eventually, we put in the brake gear and all that stuff. I used KELLEY standard head whisker couplers. They mate with everything. They work really well, and I love the whisker couplers. And they worked really well in this environment, in the draft gear on those cars. So that's fine. And then we attach the trucks with 256 screws from wherever it was I got them from. And I used, and I've thought about it now, and they're probably actually 33-inch wheels instead of 36-inch wheels, but I use Intermountain wheels and KELLEY couplers on all of my equipment. I just find that that I get much better performance that way. And whatever it is you use, standardizing on something is a good idea. I like the KELLEY couplers, and I like Intermountain wheel sets, so I buy them by the hundreds, and off we go. Okay. Then we go back to patching out this car and making whatever repairs that needed to be made to the car when it was, when it came in for service. I installed new lubrication plates or diagrams. I have custom decals for my railroad, the Utah, Colorado, and Western. So I patched it out and applied decals for my railroad, renumbered the car. Smokebox Graphics makes these really nifty, really reflective conspicuosity marks that the DOT specifies for railroad cars. It's interesting. The DODX 72-foot, 120-ton cars that haul M1s do not have these conspicuosity markings on them, as far as I've ever been able to see in any pictures that I've ever seen on the internet. But these cars do. But they're also commercial cars. So I use these reflective, they actually peel off and stick on like the prototype ones do. No, they're not they're the prototype ones are, a heavy cardstock dent or weight. These ones in the HO scale out to like 2.5 or 2 inches thick or something like that. But yeah, it's okay. When you look at these on a car, and if you take a flash photo of a car going by, they actually reflect, and it really looks kind of cool. So I like them. But we, patched out and painted over and made whatever repairs we needed to the car. So when we're done, we have a car that looks reasonable. We add a little bit of weathering to it, which we'll look at in a moment, but with the reflective decals or the reflective striping on them, repainted, re-stenciled, all that stuff, off we go, and we end up with a reasonable looking flat car that we can use for a project like this. Weathered the deck, put a wash on it, and we've got an appropriate car. Then we start looking at what we want to do to load this. I knew that I wanted to build and put this tractor and trailer on it. The kit that this tractor and trailer came from had these 2 forklifts on it, and I knew I was not going to mount the forklifts on the trailer and as part of the load. That just wasn't going to happen. Those forklifts are off to another project. But I knew I wanted this tractor trailer combination on it. I thought about mounting this dump truck onto it. Looked at that, thought about it, decided no, and arrived at this 6x6 that I thought would work well on it. It's a newer model. It's the Bigfoot version of this truck. It has a higher load capacity. The rear wheels and the front wheels, instead of having dual rear wheels, it has single rear wheels, but they are lower pressure, much wider tires than what are on the standard 6x6. So better cross-country capabilities, and off we go. So I have finally arrived at this would be the loading capacity, or this would be the load for this particular vehicle or this particular car. Something to know is that when trailers are transported, they are transported coupled to whatever prime mover it is that pulls or carries them. So they are locked down onto this trailer would be locked down onto the 5th wheel on this tractor. The landing gear is not deployed, but the trailer but the trailers and the tractors are chained down individually, and we'll look at that. So we'll take a brief look at the tractor itself. As noted previously in this clinic, I'm also a military modeler. I like military equipment. I've modeled a great deal of it. Hand painting or airbrush painting in 1/35 scale. Camouflage on equipment is fun. So this one I painted. We haven't gotten to that point yet on this tractor. We'll look at, or this truck. We'll look at that briefly, but build the rest of the equipment for it. Fold the mirrors and their braces in because they don't transport with the mirrors out. Too susceptible to damage. So build this truck, fold its mirrors in. And then we set out to paint this truck. We get the truck hand painted with the current U.S. Army scheme for not desert equipment. And there are about 30 different colors of tan, but there's only a selection. There is a select collection of federal standard paint chips for the green equipment. They're supposed to be for the tan equipment, but it seems like it never stays. The trailer bed, I started in with a very light weathering on. And when I was done, we'll see that in a minute, I ended up weathering it just a little bit because it wouldn't be completely start clean, because trailer beds are really abused, and we'll look at that in a minute. But here's the truck and tractor after their flat coats, almost ready to be secured to the to the rail car. And then this is that trailer bed weathered. It's nice the stuff that you can learn from military modeling when you're doing your weathering. I learned washes and chalks and pastels from military modeling from years ago. When I sat down to start working on military equipment for the railroad now, I went back and looked at current techniques for washes and colors and stuff like that for military equipment, and I've changed my wash to the Tamiya washes, and that's what makes the individual boards and the individual plates on the trailers pop out, is the wash that settles down, very thin wash of enamel paint that settles down into the cracks in the deck up here and makes the rest of it pop out. Same thing down here on the wheels, makes the wheel hubs pop out and makes the rest of it look good. But otherwise, there's not much weathering on this because, like I said, these are all transported clean. Okay, so we start in unloading this car, and the first thing we need to do is make sure that any piece of equipment that's loaded on a rail car is chalked in place. So I used Woodland Scenic's accent cement to glue the tires down to the deck of the car, and then I used that same material to glue in place the chocks that I cut from scrap railroad tie material from a leftover Fast Tracks project. That's great. Off we go. Then mistake number two. Mistake number one, don't build the racks. Mistake number two, finish chaining down one vehicle before you glue the other one and chalk it in place. Because working between vehicles when you're not 1/87th scale is a pain. And we will see that. That's the way it goes. So if I do this, when I do this again, not if, if I put in something like a tractor and trailer, I'll mount it first, chain it in place, and then add the next vehicle. If it's a collection of similarly sized trucks like the 6x, I'll just fasten them and chain them down one at a time. Big sigh. So they're chalked in place. And we start chaining down. The chains that I used in this case were chains that came with the tractor trailer kit, I assume for locking down in place those forklifts on the deck of the trailer itself. But since I was going to do that, I cut the chains apart, cut them down to the appropriate length. They have to go in, and you can read the Department of Defense guidelines for chaining down equipment. Those field manuals are on the internet. You can search them out in Google. I've got them downloaded on my computer, and I can read them. We do make compromises when we're modeling, but we can get there. So chain the first one down. Since then, I've purchased chains from Akeem Sale Models. They do really nice etched metal tie downs, and that's what I'm going to use for my future projects. But for this one, I started with these ones that came with that kit. Then you add the cross chains. You don't want the vehicle to move forward and backwards. You don't want it to move side to side. So they're bolted down. They're chained in place to prevent movement in both directions. Then the problem starts. This is why you don't glue everything in place all at once, because working between vehicles when you're not 1/87th scale is not really entertaining. Put the first set of chains in, Great, off we go. Put the second set of chains in, cross them. That's nice. We can continue. So that looks good. Move to the next vehicle, to the tractor, and put those chains in place. Okay. And how do I fit myself in there to do more chains? Not. So we abandon that and we go to the trailer because DoD says the trailer needs to be chained down. You can see, yes, the landing gear is up. The trailer is locked in place on its fifth wheel. We put a set of chains in to fasten down through the rings that are in here in the trailer and down to the tie down tracks on the chain tracks on the flat car. We run a set of chains down through there and turnbuckle them in place. That part works well. We go to the back of the trailer and we add those chains because there are rings in the trailer built for this purpose. So we tie those down, fasten them down to the chain guides on the rear of the trailer, and our trailer is now chained in place. That's nice. So we take this car, take it out to the model railroad. I think I got one more flat, just one more coat of flat on it because I just needed to. And out on the railroad, it looks like it fits well and it looks pretty reasonable. We continue and take this up to where it's going to live on the railroad. And we've actually seen a picture of this on this section of the railroad before. This is the POL facility that I modeled earlier. Here's more equipment that is out here on it. Here are these two cars. We'll look at this in a little bit more detail shortly. Yeah, there should have been more chains in there. I'm not displeased with the way it looks. It looks busy enough. And if this car is in a train going by at 35 or 40 or 45 miles an hour in connection with or in accompanied by other flat cars hauling other pieces of military equipment, I think people are going to watch that overall, as opposed to getting down and looking really close to see if you have extra sets of chains between all the vehicles. I can live with this. Now, it's not going into a contest because then I'd have to run brake rigging under the car and all that stuff. So if we look at it where it is sitting here, we can see that we've got the chains in front. We can see that we've got the chains between the vehicles. It's busy enough down in here that I think we're fine. The vehicles are relatively clean because, as we know, military equipment is shipped clean and serviced, so that's all fine. We get a little bit better view of it, looking more pointedly at the space between the vehicles. That's fine. It's kind of hard to tell, but the chains are actually here. You can see them in here when you look at it. If we move down a little bit to get in the entire truck and tractor or truck and trailer, we can see that we can see the chains back down here. You can see a hint of the chains in here. We can see the reflective striping down the side of the car, all of that nifty stuff. From a distance, standing in the parking lot of the guard house at this entrance gate, we can look across here at about the distance where somebody standing on the side of my model railroad would look at a car like this, granted not quite at the same eye level, but down at eye level, and it looks like a reasonable load. So I can live with the load the way it looks, just like this. So I'm pretty happy with it. And if we get closer to the track, but not on railroad property, we can see the chains clearly at the end of the trailer, and we can see a little bit better the chains down here. Here's where the chains are at the front of the trailer here, and we can see the remnants of the chains up here between the two vehicles. We can see other equipment in the back. I've forgotten where this set of U.S. Army tank cars came from. I think Athearn maybe, or maybe Walthers. These are probably Walthers cars. But we've got a good facility. We've got weather track. We have ballasted track. We've got nice looking cars, and stuff appropriately chained down. And we have kind of an overall view of the entire car sitting here in its environment at the training facility, ready to be unloaded, and the equipment taken out to whatever exercise that it's supposed to be here for. I thank you for watching my clinic. If there are questions, I suspect Dave has been recording them. If not, we'll talk about whatever else that comes to mind. This was brought to you by SERx, the really great folks at NMRAX, who do a really great job of pulling all this together despite technical difficulties, and Shadow, the super Sheltie, who is my constant companion when I'm working on my model railroad. He loves to help, and he loves to smile too. Thank you very much, folks. I appreciate it. And we'll quit sharing.
Super, very nice job today, Perry. We do
Thank
have a
you, sir.
question. The first question out is, what brand of military vehicles are you using?
Those ones were from the old Roco line. I think the Roco equipment was purchased by, I'm trying to remember who it was purchased by. They're all in newer boxes now, and the interesting thing is that most of the kits now come much more disassembled. When they originally came, the cabs and stuff like that were assembled, but the military vehicles are all Roco pattern stuff.
Okay, so you've looked at some of the other vehicles out there off and on.
I have. There are other manufacturers of HO scale military equipment. Hester does. There are a couple more. A number of them. There's a couple more from Europe. Most of them produce Australian, Austrian, Swiss, German, English equipment. Roco tends to be the one that produces the most U.S. equipment. They also produce European equipment. You can also find Soviet military equipment. I haven't seen any Chinese equipment out yet, but I can find in 187 scale. You can in other scales, particularly 135th, but in 187 scale, I tend to use Roco, and I've got a bunch of it.
Okay, you mentioned the Spring Hill or the Spring Mills.
Spring Mills Depot, yes.
Spring Mills Depot. Have you thought about scratch building any of those flat cars, or are you holding out hope?
I'm holding out hope. If that doesn't work, I'm going to scratch build the frames out of brass. I'll solder the frames out of brass and then clad them in styrene. And then go off and find trucks someplace.
Okay, I'm just checking to see if I got any more exciting questions coming up. So where do the military cars fit into the operations? Are you trying to run them just as part of a general train, or are you actually seeing if you can build something a little bit bigger, like maybe a full military?
Yeah, that's what I'm headed towards right now. They're just going in as part of regular traffic. And that's not the goal. The goal is actually to put together a full consist of nothing but military equipment.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting crossover, the military and the model railroad kinds of things. What kinds of things can you share from the military modeler side that might be interesting to model railroad?
Well, the first thing that I found when I got back into model railroading was weathering, because military modelers have been weathering their equipment since the 70s. All in an effort to make it look good. Now the techniques have obviously changed, that and add-on accessories, so the kinds of things that are now, say, 3D printed by someone like Shapeways, stuff like that has existed in the military modeling market, obviously in larger scales, for years. I mean, literally for years. Cast resin, styrene kits, not so much 3D printed until more recently. But the weathering part is what interested me. And so many years ago, when I got back into model railroading, washes for grills and washes for the steps on diesel step platforms and down running boards and things like that, to me made perfect sense, because that's what I've been doing for years in 1/35th scale armor. The weathering is the biggest thing. I think people have made great strides in weathering progress and techniques in HO scale and in scale in recent years, very recent years. I've started in pre-finishing, pre-shading brick and pre-shading roof material from techniques in military modeling. You apply a solid flat black coat to something first, and then highlight that with an airbrush with white in areas that would be more exposed to sun and therefore more exposed to fading. And then you apply very light coats of whatever the finish color is for your for the paint for a building, or the sides of a building, or the roof of a building, or a large freight car that you might be building. So you get realistic and varying shades of what the final finish color would be, and then washes and layers and layers of whatever your favorite weathering material is, whether it's pastels or chalks or something else, airbrush paint.
I've noticed one of the things I get to watch today rather than moderate is over on one of the other rooms, there's a discussion of AK interactive weathering pencils. And I think that's going to be a really interesting one.
Yes. Yep.
So the military modelers definitely are showing us the way in weathering, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think so. And it's not that I want to discriminate or take down railroad modelers, because I'm one of them. I just if we can draw from each other, if you subscribe to Model Railroader Video Plus, and David Pop will be on at some point today, that video series has videos from Aaron Skinner, who is primarily not a model railroader, but he's pulling into model railroading painting techniques like pre-shading and pre-highlighting pieces of equipment so that your overall paint job looks better. And if we can learn from each other, life is much nicer.
Okay, just out of curiosity, just got another question. Are most of the TTX cars built by TTX or by somebody else, like Trinity Rail or Gunderson?
Yeah, they're all built by somebody else, Gunderson and Trinity, and I need to go look. I would like to go hunt up who's actually building those TIGX cars, because they're new. Obviously, they've only been, the 850 of them were built in 2018, so those are going to be relatively new. I'd like to go out and look at those and see who built them. But there are people who build them, but they're not being built by TTX specifically. TTX just owns and then leases them out to whoever is part of the TTX pool.
Okay, and because I'm curious, what's going on? What's new and next on the Utah, Colorado, and Western? What are you working on?
I think I am next going to finish the interior for a railroad depot that's in the area where I've been working on scenery recently. And then I'm going to go back around to where we saw at the beginning of the clinic, the rest of my military installation, because it's been sitting there dormant for a couple of years, and I'd like to finish it, get it in and in place, so these cars actually have some place to go.
Okay, well, that's cool. Any other questions while I'm looking over the 3 screens I'm looking at to see if anybody wants to ask another question?
I'll take pictures and send them to you.
I have pictures to share with you too. I just haven't managed to get them there yet.
Oh, cool.
Perry, I think I've got a question that wasn't touched, and do excuse me if it was, because I did duck out for 5 minutes, is unloading and loading of these vehicles. Where is it normally undertaken? Is it at a transloading facility, or is it at a US Army site that has a spur?
Yeah, it's at whatever installation that they're going to. So yeah, it's all at a military portion of a port, or at a military installation inland, and it's all circus wagon style loading. If you know, when the Ringling Brothers Circus went by train, you'd pull up to an end platform and unload one wagon at a time off the end of the car, and you'd start at one end and just drive car to car to car all the way down to the end. And military equipment is loaded the same way, loaded and unloaded the same way. So the cars go in one way, and when you unload them, you turn the entire train so that the vehicles are nose first, so you can drive them off. Backing a semi-trailer down 17, 89-foot auto racks, I think, would be a nightmare.
Definitely. Any more questions that you can see there, Dave? And you're on mute.
Yep, he's on mute.
Of course I'm on mute because I'm just getting used to having 3 screens and too many keyboards. Nothing currently at the given time, just to speak a little bit more on how they're loaded and unloaded. Most of you know, if you've seen my clinics, I live along the BNSF Northern Transcon up here on the Mississippi River in Wisconsin, and we see a lot of traffic going from Camp Ripley, Minnesota down to Fort Hood, Texas. And a lot of it is armor, and they literally have to flip trains and staples on the Y so they can load.
Very cool. And one thing that's interesting that I saw the other day researching for this clinic is the bridge plates. Newer bridge plates are aluminum channels and are really lightweight. They're not heavy steel plates anymore. So one soldier had one picked up, and he was holding it up about this high and walking from one car to the next one to drop it down at the onto the loading ramp, the big concrete loading ramp. But I was amazed at how light the thing appeared.
Super. Well, thank you, Perry. I think
Yes, sir.
I'm just going to double check to make sure that we don't have any more questions. I think I see everything that's out there and we've asked, so.
Okay.
Always
Have
fun.
an excellent day, sir, and I will see you later, I am quite certain.
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Perry.
Thanks, Brad.
Dave, just before we head over and get ready for the next clinic, I think we might try something new and different, as in always with Team X. We're going to run a little bit of a poll in between ad breaks and over the next few clinics. So the poll is, what scale do you model? So everyone out there in the chat, if you want to enter what scale, and it's as basic as a capital N for N scale, a capital O for O scale. Now do bear in mind that we are talking scale, not gauge. So if you are in ON30, it is still a capital O for O scale. So that's something to enter in the chat while we cut over to some slides, and we'll be back very shortly with the next clinic.
Super. in the development of Iowa Scale Engineering's Proto Throttle, a realistic wireless miniature diesel control stand. Michael Peterson and Nathan Holmes are the owners of Iowa Scaled Engineering, while the throttle was the brainchild of Scott Thornton. It's nice to have these two guys here because they share some territory with me, my home state of Iowa. Welcome, Scott and Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Good to be here. Welcome, everyone. This is Scott Thornton, one of the partners in the development and promotion of the Proto Throttle, which is a miniature handheld wireless diesel control stand throttle. The other two partners in the development of the throttle are Michael Peterson and Nathan Holmes of Iowa Scaled Engineering. Michael and Nathan are electrical engineers who reside in Colorado, while I'm a freelance graphic designer living in Iowa. Many people have asked why the throttle is marketed through a company called Iowa Scaled Engineering when two of its primary principals live in Colorado. That's easy to explain, as all three of us are natives to the great state of Iowa, and we all attended Iowa State University, but jobs led both Michael and Nathan to Colorado. In this session, I'd like to give you a short history of what inspired us to pursue the development, explain the features of the throttle, and provide a short demo of the throttle in action. We'll have a question and answer time after this presentation, so please feel free to ask anything you'd like because we would be more than happy to answer. So let's start. One might ask, why develop a control stand throttle as there are plenty of wonderful options available for precise control of our model locomotives? That's a fair question because indeed, there are many great throttles and DCC systems available which do a fantastic job. Here we see several brands of throttles currently on the market. From left to right, Digitrax, TCS, ESU, NCE, and even a mobile phone running a train driver app, to name a few. They are all more than capable of giving the operator a comfortable and fun-filled experience operating their trains. But there is one major issue with each of these devices. They don't emulate the prototype. Here we see a typical prototype EMD control stand. It includes a variety of interesting and unique controls specific to a properly functioning diesel locomotive. On the left, we have two brake handles. Unfortunately, only the top handle is shown, which control the train and independent brakes. To the right, we can see a top lever, which is used for dynamic braking. Below that, another handle, which is the throttle. And again, below that, the reverser, or the directional lever for forward, neutral, and reverse. In addition, there are controls for the horn, bell, lights, auxiliary functions, gauges, etc. As you can see, this prototype control stand looks radically different from the control options we have as model railroaders. Now, one could build a control stand to operate their model engines as this ingenious individual did, but there's a lot going on here with operating a full-size control stand. Plus, I think this fellow is somewhat restricted in movement. I had always dreamed of operating my model trains prototypically, but like everyone else, I had no idea how to achieve such a monumental task. That is, until one day a number of years ago, I stumbled upon a YouTube video by a fellow named Bruce Turner. Bruce had taken an NCE throttle and superimposed a Rube Goldberg type diesel control stand over the top of the unit. Wow, there it was, a real life miniature control stand. His throttle had a spring-loaded horn handle and a fully detented throttle handle to boot. It was just incredible. I about fell off my chair as I watched Bruce's two videos showing him operating his Soundtrix-equipped engines with a true working control stand. Right then, I decided I had to have a throttle like his. I had been bartering with Michael and Nathan for a while. I provided design services to help promote Iowa Scaled Engineering products, and they supplied me with custom electronics. After I saw Bruce's videos, I approached Michael asking if he would help me build a few control stand throttles based on Bruce's design, one for me, and perhaps they would want a couple as well. Michael agreed, and we started to make a list of components and discuss size and other fabrication issues. One unique thing we decided to do early on was blog about the whole experience on the Model Railroad Hobbyist Forum. We thought, why not include other modelers in on the development to both get their ideas and input, but also gauge the interest in case the throttle would become a viable product. As the development continued and we made changes based on our and other modelers' input, I created more refined illustrations of the throttle to show the progress. This all started in early spring of 2016, and by late summer of that year, we had initial printed circuit boards and the first crude machining completed. We decided to take the rough prototype to the St. Louis RPM meet to show prototype modelers what we were developing and see if there was enough interest to start to think in terms of a final product. Needless to say, we had a great response at the RPM, which encouraged us to keep going. Here you can see one of the early printed circuit boards with most of the final components in place. At the same time that Michael and Nathan were refining the electronics and programming, I was working with our machining company to refine the aluminum faceplate and handles. Now things were coming together. Here you can see the final configuration of the faceplate and handles, etc. We are proud of the fact that the protothrottle has been designed and fabricated exclusively within North America. This slide shows where the majority of components come from. Here's the throttle face again with each control named. Going clockwise from upper left, we have a large latched auxiliary button. To the right is a status light. Then we have a spring-loaded horn handle. Below those is the main LCD screen with 4 low-profile control push buttons. Below that is a fully detented throttle handle, which includes idle and all 8 notch positions, just like the prototype. Below and to the left is another latch button for the bell. Next to the bell is a fully detented 3-position reverser handle, just like the prototype. Below that is a resistive variable brake handle, where full left is disengaged and to the right is fully applied. Below that are 2 fully independent and robust light switches, which include positions for off, dim, bright, and bright with ditch. And finally, at the bottom is a machined opening for a lanyard attachment. The throttle's faceplate is anodized aluminum to give the look and feel of a real control stand. The protothrottle is wireless and uses 2 radio receivers called XBs, one inside the throttle and the second on either of our 2 receivers. Between the 2 receiver models, the throttle can interface with all the major DCC systems on the market. The XB radio modules are the company's Pro version and have a range of roughly 600 feet, more than enough for almost all model railroad applications. In addition, the radio signal has proven to work well on layouts with view blocks and wall separation. Users only need 1 receiver to operate up to 20 throttles. Here is our receiver for direct cab bus applications such as NCE, Lens, and DigiKeys, while our second receiver covers Wi-Fi applications for systems such as JMRI, MRC, Digitrax, and ESU. For proprietary systems such as Digitrax and MRC, users are required to purchase those companies' Wi-Fi modules in order to work with the protothrottle. I use the receiver for my NCE power cab system that I use on my layout, and here's a picture showing the receiver connected to the cab bus with the hammerhead throttle in the lower left. Setting up the system is straightforward, but does require users to pay particular attention to the specific steps we outline in our receiver manuals. We are happy to help any customer who runs into a problem. They simply need to contact us via our support email on the website. We also have a very active groups.io forum where active users are more than happy to help solve any setup issues that arise. There are also some very nice YouTube videos that outline the setup steps in detail. I'd like to share a couple of videos with you now. The first one is off of my layout under development, and it shows the protothrottle that has a compressed speed curve and is just running up and down the track and operating the lights. So I'll play that video now, and then afterwards I've got a second video from my good friend Tom Klomoski, who has a wonderful layout based on the Georgia Northeastern Railroad in Georgia. And that video shows how the protothrottle integrates into an operating session that I think many of you will enjoy seeing. So we'll play these two videos and go from there. Now we'll watch Tom Klomoski's Georgia Northeastern op session, and Tom puts together wonderful videos on his YouTube channel of his layout and how he operates it. And in addition, he also has a really nice personal website that you can access by just going to thomasklomoski.com. So enjoy the video, and afterwards we'll have a Q&A. Thank you so much for watching. one length. That'll do. Okay.
Good.
Come back to about 8 car lengths. Check switches anyway. Yeah, actually stop just for the Dairy Queen, let's throw a switch. Yeah, gotta get off and throw a switch. You're not sticking a walk on there, do you?
Of course. Yeah,
One car.
Easy exercise.
That'll do anything there. Thank you. That'll do. Pin drop. Come back 3 car lengths. About 5 cars. Brakes off. Pull back 4125. 10 cars. About 5 cars. Three cars. 1 car to coupling. 20 feet. That'll do anywhere near. Okay. Come back about half car. Got a box car load of bricks. Okay, that'll be good. In between 4 and 25. Okay.
What were your thoughts on the proto throttle?
Very intuitive once you work with it. Only takes about, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes to get used to it in your hand. And controls are intuitive. Works great.
It fit in my hand better than I thought it would. The strap is a little tight on the fingers. Got to adjust the braking effort a little because you got to go way over and then you hit emergency a little too quickly. But that, Tom was saying, that's probably something to do with the decoder as well. Other than that, I enjoyed it.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Layout.
Okay, great. Every time I see this clinic and video, I can't get enough of it, and I think I'll be emptying out my wallet very shortly. So, Dave, over to you with any questions.
Okay, we've got a couple of good ones here. The first one, are there plans to enable tonnage to be made to work?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So when we introduced the throttle, we had grand visions of being able to adjust the tonnage through the throttle and give you different, a different feel, different momentum, things like that. And it hasn't happened yet. We still have the provisions in the code to potentially do that. Other features have become more important over time, like the new brake test feature that we were just getting ready to introduce. It may happen in the future. Part of the problem is that every decoder manufacturer has a slightly different set of CVs you'd have to tweak to make the effect work. And so making it work across all the decoders is the big problem. But maybe in the future, we'll see. It's not in the near term right now, though.
Mhm.
Okay, I have another one, quick one. Like the way it simulates the cab of the locomotive, makes the movements more prototypical. It appears that you store a profile for each locomotive in the throttle. Is that correct? And maybe you can elaborate how that might work, or how that does work.
Yeah, that's correct. You can store up to 20 configurations, is what we call them, and it associates a locomotive number, or actually DCC decoder address, with all of the function assignments for that address. So which function is assigned to the horn, which one's assigned to the brake, what turns on the front headlight, the rear headlight, ditch lights, all that stuff. Um, it- and you can store up to 20 of those configurations in the throttle. Normally, we recommend that you configure your locomotive decoders as close to the same as possible, but it's not always possible to do that. If you have say a tsunami in one locomotive and a loc sound in another, there are certain things that just aren't going to map the same. And so, yeah, you can store them in the throttle, quickly, easily recall them. There's a menu in the throttle where you can dial up that locomotive number and load it, and a few seconds later, you're all set up and ready to go for that locomotive.
So there's no way of actually reading the decoder to get that. Those
Correct.
functions.
No, it doesn't read back from the decoder. You have to enter it manually.
Okay. Well,
But once you do it, you only have to do it once. So
okay. Just a quick question on my part, because I'm a modern guy. I like the control stand thought. What about the possibility of a remote box, like the brakeman would wear? Any plans or ideas?
we've had several people ask for it. It's certainly possible. Probably at this point, I would say it's the same response we give to everyone who asks about Steam: is go ahead. The design is open. You're free to build upon it and make it better. We don't as I was scaled, we don't have any plans at the moment to do another version like that. But it certainly would be possible, especially a diesel belt pack. It's just rearranging the controls. So
Okay. That was kind of a curiosity on my part. You mentioned theme. I can imagine what that might change the feel and the look, obviously, because it would be a different controls.
yeah. If anyone's interested in doing it, I mean, we're willing to work with them and help them get it off the ground. And like I said, the whole design is open source, so you've got a good starting point there.
If you're using it with another system like digital Digitrax, do the other throttles still operate on the layout at the same time?
Yes. Yeah, this just acts like another throttle on your system. We have a little receiver module that receives the radio signals from the proto throttle, and then that translates it into the commands that make it look like another throttle on the system.
And he was speaking specifically to Digitrax, and you mentioned the LNWI or LWNI. I can't remember the order of the letters. That's how that.
Yeah, for Digitrax, the interface is through their LNWI. Our proto throttle looks like a cell phone throttle to the Digitrax system.
Okay, and talking about the cell phone throttles, obviously there's some opportunities there for potentially remote operations. If you could elaborate a little bit on that, maybe.
Yeah, so if you have a JMRI set up and you can communicate using our receiver to your JMRI server, it can act, like I said, it acts just like a cell phone throttle. And the possibility there is that you can have JMRI running at one person's house with the throttle, and then JMRI running at the other person's house with the layout. You create the bridge between them, and you can operate anywhere around the world. You can operate someone's layout anywhere around the world, and we've had some people actually do that successfully.
And we just had a question bridging off the Digitrax question, lens as well.
Correct. Yes. We have two receivers. The first receiver is a direct plug-in, and it's intended for NCE and lens command stations. And yeah, it just plugs right into the throttle bus, and just like any other throttle would. And then the other receiver covers everything else, and it makes the proto throttle look like a Wii throttle, wireless throttle. And so you can talk to the Digitrax LNWI, the MRC Wi-Fi module, JMRI, anything else that can handle a cell phone throttle will be covered by that receiver.
And we've tended to see them used on some smaller layouts. Are there any issues with bigger layouts as far as numbers of throttles in play that you know of?
We haven't encountered that. There is going to be an upper limit to how many throttles one receiver can handle. We would say it's between 5 and 10 realistically. And at that point, if you hit that, you'd just add another receiver to the system and start attaching throttles to that second receiver. But we really haven't heard any complaints or feedback on problems in big layouts.
Okay.
Well, the XB receivers are pretty robust, aren't they, Michael? So they can.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Radio range hasn't been an issue. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not terribly radio dependent. Then that's good. Seen it used a lot with 2-person crews, and I know Scott runs it fairly heavily. Tell us a little bit about your operations experience with it and running, maybe.
Scott,
Well, yeah, like on my layout, I have a small branch line layout, so I just operate the throttle just one up, and I actually haven't had a chance to have anyone join me, so I just run it myself and play both roles. But I've operated with the throttle on other layouts where one operator is the engineer with the throttle, and then the other operator is the conductor, and it works great. It's really a lot of fun because then the engineer can focus on his role, just like the prototype engineer focuses on his role, and he takes commands from the conductor, and it works out really nice. Just like you saw in the video, they had a tandem team there, and the engineer was just focusing on the throttle. The throttle, by its nature, slows operations down. It's not slam and bang type of operations. You have to, since you have momentum very high on decelerization, when you throw the throttle into idle, the engine will coast for quite a distance, just like the prototype, because of the mass. And so that allows you to incorporate the brake, and it has a very realistic feel. And we've had operators tell us that in addition to the realistic feel, it also makes operations more precise. For example, coupling. You can kiss couple very easily once you get used to the throttle, which is only a few minutes. And so it just adds to the realism of an operating session.
Yeah, I can bridge off of that because I've had the opportunity to use it. Mark Stenwick's a Milwaukee Road beer line with MP15s, and I like MP15s, and it was really nice to be able to just coast up there and with a little bit of brake make a really comfortable joint. You're not banging the cars around or anything like that. So
right.
So just checking to see if we have any more questions. Oh, we have a question. How many throttles do you have for yourselves, or do you have in your collections? They're asking.
I have 2.
Yeah, we each got 2 out of the deal. That was our agreement up front.
Yeah.
And of course, I've got 80 more sitting in a box behind me, but those don't go to me.
So Michael knows the pool, where the pool is, if he has to put an operating session.
Yeah. We're all small layout owners, so we don't need that many throttles.
Mm-hmm.
Although we have had, I think we had one customer, didn't we, Michael, that has 10 of them? Has 10 throttles.
Someone ordered 10 up front. That was pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you guys have kind of delved into some other products. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that. Some of the things you're up to.
Sure. I was scaled engineering, started off, just Nathan and I had ideas on model railroad electronics we wanted for ourselves or we thought others would want. And so we started just building it and putting it out there on the market, seeing how it'd sell. So we've we've had a fast clock system for a while. We're actually redoing that and going to relaunch that here soon. We have a time lock controller for simulating time lock switches. There's a
Servos
number
for
of
turnouts that you had for a while.
Yeah, we had a turnout controller. We do have which has been pretty popular, is an IR sensor, infrared sensor, below track infrared sensor. Super reliable, easy to use, no adjustments needed. You just install it and hook it up and ready to go. That's called the Train Spotter, and we've had quite a bit of success with that. Soon to be coming out with a DCC block detector. We think it's an advancement over what's in the industry right now. There's very little in the way of calibration that you have to do, just push button calibration and you're done. Using some modern electronics techniques to better sense the current and not be as susceptible to the parasitics you get on layouts, like the capacitance between wires and such, that can screw up other block detectors and make it hard to get them properly calibrated. So we've tried to find a way to make that easier for the user. And then in addition to the electronics, we is actually the proto throttle. We 3D print some of the brackets inside of it in order to get the encoders positioned how we want them and keep them in that position. And so we ended up buying a 3D printer a while back just to be able to print those. And then through a series of fortunate accidents, I guess, we found out that printing corrugated grain bins actually works really well. And so we now have several 3D printers humming away, printing our line of grain belt models, grain bins, and corrugated culverts.
So you've kind of branched out in the ways of getting things accomplished. That's a good deal.
Yeah.
With your fast clock, what is different?
Not a lot initially. It'll look very, very similar to the original one. We've just improved the internals significantly so that it's easier to manufacture, better buttons and such. But we will be looking at potentially adding an analog clock face add on to it. And the benefit of our fast clock system is it's completely wireless and synchronized. So the main head unit is where you set everything up, and then you can have secondary displays anywhere around the layout, and they automatically synchronize with the main unit. And so that's the selling point of this system. And then, like I said, we're looking at potentially doing an analog display that also synchronizes with the master.
Very nice. And you have some products in development too that you're not mentioning, so that'll be down the road for people to look forward to.
Yeah, we're always working on new things. We're not sure if they're going to work yet, so but yeah, we'll announce them when the time comes.
Yeah,
testing is always a good thing. Oh, we have one other comment. Somebody wants 5 of them. Number 1, how do they get a hold of you? Number 2, is there a quantity discount? And do you have an NMRA discount?
So you can get a hold of us directly at iascaled, iascaled.com. And then you can order them straight off the website. Even if they don't say they're in stock, you can still order and we'll get them built up and sent out. The proto throttles and the grain belt models, culverts and grain bins, are also available through Spring Creek Model Trains. They're our dealer for those, so you can also contact them. At this point, there are no quantity discounts, so sorry. There's actually not as much profit in the throttle as a lot of people think. So we priced it so that we could make what we needed to make, but not have to play games on MSRP and always being on sale discounts. So.
Yeah, and one thing we've been promoting too is that the throttle is designed and manufactured completely in North America, primarily in the States, but the box comes from Canada. So just a little.
Yeah, you may have seen our July ads in various magazines that showed where all the pieces came from.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Brad, I've been asking all the questions. Is there anything you want to know?
No, as usual, I've seen this clinic a couple of times and all the questions are all been answered, and I lined up the remote op question and that was all answered for me. So if there's nothing else there in the chat, I'd like to thank Scott and Michael. But is there anything there, Dave? Just saw you quickly have a glance.
Anything else? So I
Okay.
think we're good.
Well, I'd just like to thank Scott and Michael again for another great clinic. I always look forward to seeing what's out there and in technology, and this is something that's definitely on my bucket list to buy. And we'll jump over into a break here, and everyone out there in the chat, it's probably a great time to go grab a coffee or something like that, and we'll be back with you shortly.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, welcome back from your little bit of a break. Hope you got something to refresh yourself with. We all love to wire our model railroads. So does our next presenter. He operates the Missouri and Short Life Railroad, which he has rewired 3 times. This clinic is packed with information on various wiring terminals. Please welcome Carl Bloom.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to help you come up with a new way of wiring. And it's based on these terminal strips like this. But let's switch over and I'll do the PowerPoint presentation. Then I'll have a demonstration and time for questions at the end. So if we can switch over to the first slide. Can everybody see that? Good. All right, so there's a typical strip there. It shows a trailer connection on one side and another connection on the other side. They're all interconnected. You can also put crimp-on connectors underneath the screw heads. So, you know, we're all used to the usual methods. Solder I hate soldering underneath the table, dropping on my face. And the tape that tends to fall off. Wire nuts are handy. The suitcase connectors have become real popular because you don't have to strip the wire. You just clamp them on and you're done. If you're careful, you can actually take those apart and reuse them. And then there's the historical solder connections from the old radio days. Up on the right-hand side, it's telephone punch-down panel. Those are really nice. If you can ask the contractors tearing down buildings, you can get those. The newest one are those white Euro connectors. Now, the only drawback I have with those, they're really nice, is that there's no way to jumper them to make more than one connection. Now, the last photo there on the lower right, this is my all-time favorite. These are what they call DIN connections. They're used for industrial machine tools. And I was able to get several cabinets of these. They're pretty expensive to buy them for use, but they are very, very versatile. Let's see, so did I go right? Yeah, there we go. So this is why I came up with a new system. I was at Lowe's and they have this PVC board. It's the same size as a 1x2, but it's 100% PVC. And I like that because it won't hold moisture. You know, you could do this with wood, but I'm afraid the wood would get moist and you'd have strange short paths. 2 sides to it. One side's smooth, the other side has a wood grain. So because it's nice, it's white, you can write on it with a Sharpie pen and make notes of what each connection is. I use the smooth side. Now here's a cross section, shows you how this works. I use a table saw and I just cut a groove 1/4 inch deep in the wood. And that's 2 18 gauge conductors there. You stuff those in the groove and you drive the screw right into them. You can see there's a pretty good amount of contact between the wires and the screw itself. Even looks like there might even be a bit between them. I doubt that, but they're sheet metal screws, number 8 by 1/2 inch, seem to work fine. They're the same screws that AC contractors use for the ducts. So the next question is, how much current can they conduct? Now, do not use these for 110 volts, but to get enough current, I hooked an electric heater up to it and my amp meter. And there you can see it's going through a dozen connections. I had no voltage drop. The white cord actually started heating up before any of the connections did. So it's safe, but for our use, stay below 20 volts. So I took the 1x2, cut them in nice, I think they're about 10-inch long strips. This is the one failure we had. I cut the grooves 1/2 inch deep. I thought 1/2 inch screw Well, ½ inch deep, the wire was able to wiggle away and not make a connection. So then I switched over to 1/4 inch deep and they worked fine. On the left picture, there's a screw in the fence. That screw gives me a spacing. So I cut one groove, move it over to the screw, cut the next groove, makes a nice even cut. And you can do it with a radial arm saw. You can probably even do it with a chop saw. And let's see if I can get that video doesn't want to run. That's fine. It's just cutting across the board. And you can buy this stuff in wider pieces, a 1x4. And I cut a bunch of grooves and then sliced it in half to make 2 sets. And then I like to use a countersink drill bit and put countersunk holes in the end, and then use sheetrock screws to hold it to the benchwork. So there's a shot of drilling the holes in the block. So I was helping Les wire his layout. So he has a mobile control station on a cart. And that cart has a 40 conductor wire coming back from it. So that 40 conductor wire comes into the central terminal, and then he has 3 bus wires leading out of there. This is European industrial control wire. It has 1 green-yellow ground wire, and then it looks like it's got 11 or 12 numbered wires. It's really, really cool stuff to work with, but it's basically 18 gauge. And then the bus wires go out, and then here's where you can see the drops coming down from the train table top and connecting to the numbered terminals. Now, there on the right side, you can see my first attempt at a ground bus bar. Just cut 1 groove from one end to the other of the block. Didn't like it because it's really messy, so I can prefer to serpentine it. The other thing is both these blocks are 3/4 inch wide. They're only wide enough to get 1 screw in. I think the 1.5 inch wide, you can get up to 3 screws in 1.5 inch, and makes it much more versatile. Now here's an example of what I call serpentine wires. You can see there on the left, there's a red and blue wire come in, and they serpentine along. So this would be like maybe power supply wiring for turnouts. And then the 5 black wires coming in at the top, and then you've got the wires from the bottom leading off to your turnout motors. And you can see I've used the Sharpie pen to mark the red and blue grooves, and a black Sharpie pen to number them. So it's pretty clear what you've got wired up there, and it's very easy to make changes. If you make a mistake, you just take the screw out, move the wire, put the screw back in. There's no stripping, there's no soldering. There's a close-up of the groove and the screws going into it. Then one board, we had a lot of, those are like 24 gauge telephone wires coming down. If you get to a thin wire, the screw is less likely to cut into it. So what we did is you double up the wire until it's the size of an 18 gauge wire. Then it worked fine. Now here you can see that there's 2 screws in a lot of these positions because I had the wires going off in 2 different directions. Now here's the mobile control cart. You can see the left-hand picture, you can see the long bus bar or terminal strip with all the wires sorted out from the big cable, and then leading up to the 2 transformers and the turnout controls. Now, another thing I thought of, if you're really starting on the layout and you're going to use L-girder, you can cut these grooves right in your framework. Use the 1x4. It's a little more expensive than regular 1x4s, but if you could run grooves from one end to the other of your table, just stuff the wires in there you'd have a bus bar all over your layout. Now here, the green wire is your, say your north rail, and the blue wire is your south rail for loop 1, and the red wire would be loop 2. And you drop the wires down from above and put a screw into the bus line, and you're done. I also found those little rollers that they sell for doing window screens. Makes a great roller for pushing the wire down in the groove. And there's Les at the control panel. You see the bus bar connections down below. And he was real happy. It's running well for him. And why don't we switch over to the camera again? And I've got a buzz bar, a buzz box, and a demonstration, so you can see how this works. So, are you switched over? I'll assume so. Okay. So, this little buzz box, a 9-volt battery, and a little buzzer I bought from All Electronics. And a couple 16 or 18 gauge wires. So I'm going to use a screwdriver, stuff the wire down in the groove, stuff the next wire down on top of it. There they are. And get the wire. Just drive that in. So that's pretty annoying, but you made a connection. A little buzz box like this is great for when you're doing wiring. A lot of times when I'm doing the drops below, I'll hook the buzz box right across the rails. And if I make an incorrect connection and I short out the layout, you know it right away. The other way I do it is I power up the layout and leave a sound locomotive sitting on the track. And if you make a mistake, the sound locomotive stops. Or if you're trying to isolate a section, you can cut wires until the sound stops. Let's see, part of it's going to show you some other connections I found useful. There's the suitcase. We all know those. Here are a couple telephone connections. These are gel filled. They're for that 24 gauge wire. You just put the wires in there and crimp them, a little bit like suitcases, but for lighter wire. There's a small one. Those show up on the surplus market real cheap from time to time. Here's one that was real handy. Can't remember what they're called, but they're telephone connections. They got little teeth inside like an alligator. And when I was helping my friend Jim rewire his layout, he had lots of signals that have been wired with a magnet wire, enamel coated wire. And under the layout, scraping that enamel off is really tedious. I found out that if you use these connections, the teeth bite through the enamel. It was very, very easy to rewire his layout. Now here's a couple of those DIN connectors. They've got a hole on each side for wire going through. The neat thing about the DIN connectors is they have these jumpers. So like this one could jump 3 blocks together, which give you 6 wire connections, all the same circuit. And then they also have triple layer ones that have three layers, so you can get a lot of wiring in a compact thing. But these are like $2 or $3 each. There's smaller square blocks. The screws I used are number 8 by 1/2 inch long. They're like $4 a 100. Not expensive. And I guess that's about it. I'm ready for questions. Let's see, can I switch over to where Okay. Can I do it? No. Let's see. There we are. Yeah. So I've got the screen going on, the infinity. There we go. Yeah. So did any questions come in on the chat line?
Haven't found a question yet, but what gauge wire are you using for most of this, just to get us started?
Most of it was 18 gauge.
So
that's what they tended to wire those industrial cabinets up with. So, you know, as I stripped them out, I saved all the wires.
okay,
So I just have a bundle of wires on the layout. Jim would help me. He'd solder 2 wires to the track. I'd put the track in place, drop the wires through, and then, you know, go underneath the layout, and there'd be wires hanging down everywhere. And we tried to stick with 2 different colors, so it was easy to figure out which wires belong together.
okay. So your feeders are the same gauge up to the track.
Right. Yeah, I've got about 1,000 feet of track on my layout, and I've got a drop about every 3 foot on the entire layout.
Okay, so I should probably ask this question just so I get a good frame of reference. What scale are we working in?
O gauge.
O gauge. Okay.
Yeah.
So 3 rail, I assume.
3 rail. The Gargraves track.
Okay.
So we do the center rail on every piece, and one of the outside rails on every piece.
Okay. So basically the track itself is held together with joiners or pins, I think I remember.
Right. Yeah. Gargraves use little square pins.
Are you feeding?
I'm not depending on the pins for electrical conduction.
I was going to say, are you feeding every section then, or?
Every section. That's 3 foot long.
Okay.
It's like a track.
That's a chunk of work. So I see why you have all the connections. With all the things that you're putting together and pieces that you're putting together, just is there any way, do you tag anything other than just the Sharpie on the terminal blocks or terminal strips, or are you tagging wire as well?
I'm not tagging a lot of wires. Like the turnout controls, I found that a company called McMaster Carr had labeling wires for that. It's basically a fancy stickum. You can wrap it around the wire. You write on the white section, then there's a little bit of clear section, cover that up. But you know, mostly labeling the terminals enough to keep track of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like there's a good practical application for using these terminals not only in O gauge but in HO scale as well. Changing hats for a second, how might you change it? Would you use different size, if you different size wire, different size terminal? How would you change that if you could, or if you needed to?
If I needed to, you know, if you went to a heavier wire, I probably, you know, wouldn't think it'd be suitable for much heavier than that. You know, you really want to have serious connections. I mean, if you're using more than 16 gauge, you're probably not talking toy trains any longer. But you could just cut the groove larger. If you go to smaller gauges, you just double the wire up until it fills the groove. And if it fills the groove, then it can't escape the screw when it comes in.
Okay. Brad, I see you just popped in. Question?
How long ago did you stumble across this PVC, and when did you implement it on your layout?
Well, I have a hot tub, and I have to have a protector around the heater in the hot tub. So I used one made out of redwood for years, and it finally rotted away. So I saw this PVC stuff at the store, so I thought I'd try it, and it's really, really cool to work with. And you know, I thought, well, if I put a screw in it, it'd be like the other suitcase connectors, insulation displacement. So, I did some tests and figured out it worked.
Okay. Do you have any tips for someone that wants to implement this into their existing layout?
Use lots of, use the Sharpies to mark what you're doing. The usual color code wire is a good idea, or numbered. That, a lot of the wire I used from Les's layout was numbered. Can't think of much else than that. There was the serpentine wiring. If you had, a lot of things that get the same power source.
Do you like to use with these connections? Do you like to use stranded wire or solid?
I prefer stranded wire. Now the really fine telephone wire, that's solid, but I like stranded wire. But my first layout when I was a kid, Dad tried to save some money and he bought aluminum wire. It was available back then as doorbell wire. And I got extremely frustrated because you bend it twice, it'd break inside the insulation and you wouldn't know where the break was.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, copper wire is not that bad, but for things that move like cars and trailers and train layouts, I like stranded wire. I think it's easier to work with.
Have you had any problems with corrosion or electrolysis build up in the terminals?
No, haven't seen that. Now I would say that like the suitcase connectors, that little chunk is steel in there. So, I mean, you might get troubles if you're in a wet location, but I think in dry locations, it's not going to be a problem.
Okay. Any questions over there in the chat, Dave, while we're still going?
Have not seen any yet.
Okay. What
Go
about
back and double check here. Nope, nothing right now.
this PVC product? What sort of dollars are we looking at for it?
I think 1 by 2 by 8 foot long is maybe $6.
Okay. Do you do anything special with putting the screws in, or is it just as simple as drilling and screwing them in, or does the PVC crack?
I haven't had much trouble with cracking. Putting the screw in is very simple. I cut one terminal board with grooves going 2 directions. Like imagine this one with grooves going both directions. And I found out that the individual squares of a waffle they'd tip over. They didn't break out or anything, but I said, oh, that's making little squares isn't a great idea.
Okay. Do you have anything there to add, Dave, while I quickly jump around and have a look?
I was just going to say the method, the PVC material that you're using, I built a test track out of it because obviously we have to test stuff. But I had never thought of using the table saw cuts for running wire. I just ran it across the bottom with wire staples and then ran it up. That's a great idea. I like that.
Yeah. You could even put it on the top side and just run it underneath the ties.
You could do that. So now you got me thinking about a couple other things that I want to do.
That's great.
Because I can see having terminal strips and different terminals, potentially a switch if I wanted to go from my DCC to my DC. I modeled in HO, so my DCC to my DC power sources. So there's some applications here, not only from the O gauge side to the HO side. You're making me think. That's what these things are about.
And smaller gauges like N too.
Yeah, you could do it in just as easily. I think in my scale, and then I go back and sometimes apply it to other things. But that's a good piece.
The other thing I'd recommend is switches and plugs. On my layout, I use those toggle telephone connections, switches, to where I can switch my layout from DCC to conventional AC Lionel transformer or off. And that's been a great aid in troubleshooting. If something goes wrong in a section, I just reach down, throw that switch, and that section's dead, and the rest of the layout's back up operating again.
Yeah, and making the troubleshooting a whole lot easier if you can isolate it without having to take stuff off of power supplies.
Mhm.
That I like. That's a good tip.
And my turnout motors, I use I think they're RJ12 telephone connections, like the ones that you plug in the wall for your phone.
Yep.
That way, if a motor goes bad, I just unplug it, remount the new one and plug the new one back in. So, in that situation, I don't have any rewiring to do at all.
Yeah, anytime that you can do fast change outs, it might save an operating session or your ability to run for somebody who's standing in your room with their foot tapping. I've been there.
Oh, yeah. That's the worst. You have the layout shorted out and everybody's doing nothing.
Yeah.
And you have everybody making suggestions what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see you've got a OPSIG. I'm going to jump a little bit off topic here as the questions have sort of come to a bit of a stop. I see you've got an OPSIG shirt on there. Do you want to give us a bit of
Yes.
background about your layout and your modeling?
Sure. Well, I met Jim Vealing years ago, and he was operating with waybills and car cards, and finally I said, this makes the railroad have a real purpose. You run from town to town, a little switching puzzle. And I said, this is what I want to do. So my layout's modeled on his. He had 3 towns and a yard. Trains go out from the yard, hit the 3 towns. So I pretty much have the same thing, except in no gauge. His was HO. And then we came up with what I call the never-ending program schedule. It runs, we call them hours. It runs about 150 hours. Each hour is an individual train movement, so it's very sequential. And you make up a train, the train goes out, and it doesn't have to hit all 3 towns in the same order. But it's just one train moving at a time, and each train has, we call a train book, and each page of the train book is the work for each town. So it's very sequential for the operators. You just go through the book one page at a time. You drop off 3 cars, you pick up 3 cars, so that the towns their population stays even from session to session. And then at the end, the trains towards the end just loop back to the beginning of the schedule. So when we have our operating section, it's lunchtime, we just stop and just mark your trains ready to leave or in process, and we go to lunch. And then we come back the next week, we just pick up. Before coronavirus hit, we were doing Jim's layout every week and my layout every week. So we're getting like 6 hours of operation in.
How many operators usually come to a session at your place or
We run
Jim's?
about 5 to 6. And one thing I do as dispatcher is I make up a duty roster at the beginning of the session, list who's there, and then you might start with a train, but when that train goes to a holding track, when it comes out of the holding track, I'll assign it to somebody else. So none of the operators is sitting idle for a really long period of time. So well, I didn't get a train at the beginning of the session, I might as well go home now. It's like, just wait, wait a few minutes, something will come up.
Yeah, that's always a good thing in op sessions. We try very hard not to let anybody sit around.
Right. Yeah, Jim's layout has 2 holding tracks. We call them the east and west tracks. Mine, I have 3 right now, I think. I actually have 9 holding tracks, but I only use 3. And so like on my layout, those are Chicago, Minneapolis, and St. Louis. So in the schedule, say the train's going to St. Louis, so you put on the holding track, and then the dispatcher will do the waybills that get changed in St. Louis and put it back on the hook.
And then back to Chicago or
right. my yard is Nauvoo. That's my folks' hometown. It's a little burg on the Mississippi River. Never had a railroad. Had a couple tries, but never got one. So it finally has a railroad. The biggest town is Ruth Mountain. That's named after my aunt, who always made sure I had toy trains at Christmas. And then Vern Summit and Jamestown.
Well, I can smile. I live on the Mississippi River right now. If I turn the camera, you can see out the window and see the river.
Oh, great! Yeah. Nauvoo is just south of Burlington, Iowa, which is my hometown.
I know Nauvoo. I've been there.
Yeah. It's not quite like it was when I was a kid.
I didn't remember a railroad there, so I couldn't remember when you said there wasn't a railroad. It was kind of
yeah. No, I've got a stock certificate for the Keokuk, Nauvoo, and Macomb Electric Railroad, which I guess my uncle blew some money on it. Never happened.
Uh-huh. So anything else, Brad, while I look at the chats to see what's there?
Are you part of a local club or anything like that you want to give a bit of a plug to worldwide?
Sure, yeah. I'm near Charleston, South Carolina. The local club has a storefront at Citadel Mall, and they've got about 75 to 100 members. They've got an N gauge, O gauge, HO gauge, and I think S gauge layouts available. The O gauge is pretty much running loops, but the HO gauge, I think they have operating sessions from time to time. I think they use, what's the popular one for JMRI? They're using that for forwarding their cars. With Jim and a few of others, we have the informal home layout round robin of running. TCA group is fairly active. The club puts on 2 shows a year, although both of those have been canceled for this year, which are pretty well attended shows.
Okay, tell us about these 2 shows a little bit more, so next year everyone watching can get out and join in the action.
It's called the Best Friend of Charleston Train Show, and they've been held at the let's see, where have they been? They've been at Danny Jones Armory for years and years. And and now they've got 2 buildings. They've got the main armory, and they also have the gymnasium across the street. Usually have 2 or 3 operating layouts, about 75 to 100 tables. Usually it's April and November are their shows. A group of us started the shows, I guess probably 20 years ago. And started with just a November show, getting everybody ready for Christmas. Thought that'd be a good time. And it's a Saturday and Sunday show. We figured that gives enough time for the public to come in and see trains and maybe buy something for Christmas. The TCA meets tended to be a Saturday morning event. And, by the time people heard about it, well, it was already over. So we wanted a real show.
Cool. I got another question just for giggles. Somebody starting out, what advice would you give?
I would suggest building a module. Before I had my train room, I started building 027 modules on hollow core doors. And for a while, I was taking that around to shows. I had a layout that was, just me, that set up to 14 by 42 foot with 2 loops of 027 track. And it built a shovel yard for that, 9 tracks on a turntable. So it had a 15-foot diameter turntable, actually 15 foot, that I could run a 15-foot train on or off that turntable. I'd be running trains at a show, and people say, well, we want to see that steam locomotive run, or we want to see the passenger train run. And, before that, it was a real hassle. You do a lot of 5-finger switching. but then made up this huge turntable. It was great. He's just say, okay, I'll run the train off onto the train and run another train onto the layout.
Wow, I can't even imagine a 15-foot turntable.
Well, it didn't turn 180 degrees. It just turned back and forth like it's more of a like a shuttle yard, a sector yard. I think that's the British. The British make great use of that because a lot of their shows, they just have a small section of town with a shuttle yard at each end. So it'll be a parade of different trains running across their, they have really great scenery on those little modules.
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely.
My scenery mainly consisted of green paint and little plastic trees from Plasticville.
I think we all started out with a few of those too. I remember Plasticville buildings.
Now, the great part was to, do a show and see the kids around the table, just gawking at the trains. And
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I'm involved with a modular group right now is just getting out and showing the hobby off to the general public who may not ever see our basement, but will definitely get to see something running around. And then they get hooked, and maybe they go to the Legos, maybe they go to the O-Gauge, which a lot of people know and probably have. I can't count how many people I've pointed to, people who fix stuff for people, because you have to do that.
Well, the other thing my wife Jamie and I do is we've made up 3 small tables that we take to festivals, and we take them to the train shows too. The one table is just a flat top with some track painted on it, and that's for the floor push trains, so the toddlers like that.
Mhm.
And then one train's all Brio stuff. And then the third train has a figure 8 loop of Lionel track on it. And, especially with the Thomas, they came out with an inexpensive Thomas with a remote control. So we can give the kids the remote control and let them run the train. So,
Oh, yeah.
So that's been a lot of fun to do the shows with the kids coming up, and except for the Lionel train, it's very hands-on for the kids, and I think that's real important to let the kids actually handle the trains.
Very true. Brad, anything else you've got?
No, I've got nothing else to add. So if you can't see anything there, Dave,
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so
I'd like
I think we're good.
to thank you for a great clinic, and it's something that I'll be definitely looking to see if I can source down here in Australia and look at implementing it on my own layout. Everyone out there in the chat, I am just going to quickly remind you before we farewell, Carl, is we will be restarting the stream after this clinic. So just bear with us for 5 or 10 minutes, and definitely go out, grab a coffee and stretch your legs, because there's 4 hours of clinics coming up and they're going to be great. So Carl, I'd like to thank you for putting this clinic together for us and chatting away here about the club and your own modelling.
Okay, well, Brad and Dave, thank you so much for your help and all your questions. It was
Thank
a
you.
real